So let's get going and talk some trash. These guys are great. I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves and tell us, first of all, about your organization, and we'll kick it off from there.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aschley Yanda. I'm with Urban Machine, and we are an Oakland-based startup building robots to mechanically remove nails and metal fasteners from dimensional lumber that comes from construction waste.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'm James Slattery. I'm representing San Francisco's Environment Department, city agency. I guess I'm here to represent the policy side of the discussion. I'm a member of the Zero Waste Program team, so kind of gives an indication where I'm coming from perspective-wise is end of life. But as mentioned earlier, when we're talking about the circular economy, kind of bending that line so that end of life is directly in contact with the start of life. So in studying these waste-related problems that are now climate and atmospheric related problems and equity and community health related problems all rolled into one, our team is offered a toolkit for interventions, and they tend to take shape as partnerships, programs, and policies. And so for the last 7 years, I've been collaborating and researching and developing with others on how San Francisco can advance a mandate that would require deconstruction rather than demolition in certain projects. And that's kind of one strand of the double helix in the DNA. The ultimate goal is not deconstruction. The ultimate goal is to reuse the products and materials that have been liberated through the practice of deconstruction. And so what we've been cooking up is basically a approach to a policy that is three-pronged. The first would be to come to a structure that is slated for demolition and do a survey to see what could be salvaged and redirected into secondary markets. If there's priority products indicated on that survey, that project team would have to disassemble and divert them to reuse outcomes. And then the third prong is to actually speak to new construction. That's where I think this room comes into play, which is to then start to require that they reintegrate these products and materials at certain thresholds. So creating a demand on top of the supply that's being generated through deconstruction. And I'll talk extensively as we go through, but here are some of the partnerships that we've been working on, Urban Machine and the Reuse People. Michael, please take it away.
Hi, I'm Michael Chambers with the Reuse People and Building Resources of San Francisco. The Reuse People is a national organization. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we have 9 affiliated associates across the country that basically do what we do at our Oakland warehouse and San Francisco warehouse. What we do is we take materials that have been deconstructed, carefully deconstructed, and we receive those primarily as a donation from the donor. Most of our work is from residential, but we are on the leading edge and one of the nation's first to get into the commercial redistribution. So we take all those materials and we redistribute or make it available for others to use in their projects, including commercial or whatever the application may be. And we recycle, or not recycle, sorry, bad word. And for purposes of this conference, we will not ever use the word recycle. We do not do that. And we'll get into later as to why recycling is actually bad for the environment and in our discussions here. So we're trying to do whatever we can to redistribute those materials in their form and maybe change their use.
Ask a question first about deconstruction. James, are there policies in San Francisco that encourage deconstruction over traditional demolition? And then how are these policies shaping the construction landscape? Are there incentives for developers?
Yeah, currently within San Francisco, there is no policy to drive the practice of deconstruction. We do have a long history, multi-decade history of deconstruction happening voluntarily, and that has resulted in an infrastructure or an ecosystem of practitioners, everyone from deconstruction contractors to material resellers receiving those deconstructed materials. Within the larger Bay Area region, though, about 4 years ago, Palo Alto became the first jurisdiction in California to require deconstruction and to require that the disassembled products were verified to have been diverted into a reuse outcome. So those are the first 2 stages of the 3-pronged policy framework I was mentioning earlier. And so San Francisco intends to follow on the heels of Palo Alto's pioneering effort, but we're recognizing there is the need for that 3rd prong to come online, rather than just require the disassembly and require the diversion to a reseller. It is also trying to create the demand through a reuse mandate. There are incentives, though, even though there's not policies, there are incentives and other market forces at play that would drive a project team to consider deconstruction and reuse in the absence of a mandate. You heard from Michael, one of those incentives would be a residential project has the ability to donate those materials. Those donations can be deducted from federal taxes to offset the costs of the practice of deconstruction and the labor and logistics involved. Commercial projects, because they've been depreciating those assets, don't have that ability to claim that same deduction, but they could avoid the costs associated with recycling, which they are required to do. So San Francisco has a multi-decade history of requiring recycling. We've prohibited a truck from leaving a construction site and going right to landfill. Those recycling facilities are not free. Whereas if you routed that truck away from the recycling facility, which was already routing away from the landfill, and sent it to an operation like Aschley's or Michael's, you could still donate that material. You're not going to claim it on a tax deduction as a commercial project, but you would have avoided the costs associated with the mandatory recycling. And there are other incentives that are out there. I could talk more about those if they come up. But yeah, I'm here today, and this conversation will actually continue. I'll plug it now. September 25th, my organization, along with Stop Waste, our sister agency out of Alameda County, and EPA Region 9, we're reconvening a working group that was launched in 2017 called the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group. That group was launched in response to Portland being the first city in the nation to require deconstruction. And EPA Region 9 saying to the Bay Area, how come we haven't done that? If Portland can do it, how come no one in the Bay Area, the most sort of progressive waste management practices are in place here? What's going on? And so we convene with NGOs, private sector, public sector, and again, Palo Alto kind of spun out of that effort, becoming the first to require it. We're reconvening on the 25th to move the conversation to the reuse side of the equation, of the deconstruction reuse equation, and realizing that to get from disassembled to reintegrated, there's a lot of gaps that need to be bridged. And some of them are market forces, some of them are infrastructure related. These materials are large and they do need temporary lie down space. And when you get out of product such as lumber and you get into maybe commercial door systems, you need enclosed, climate controlled, very safe spaces, safe from theft, safe from the environment, from weather. And the region is greatly lacking those resources right now. And so the conversation on the 25th is going to be about how do we start to chicken and egg the conversation or the policy framework to ensure that we are activating market forces, incentives, and starting to figure out how to repurpose existing infrastructure. Some of it is dedicated to recycling, some of it's just unutilized parcels. How can these be activated for the purpose of supporting reuse? And an example of that is, Michael mentioned he's with Building Resources of San Francisco. That's housed on a parcel in southeast San Francisco that my department of Environment leases from a sister agency, the port, at a below market rate. We then go and find, through a public process, a nonprofit operator to run that site, mission alignment with our zero waste goals. And so we've partnered with the reuse people on that who are running that site. So that's a model that's working, and we want to figure out how to scale that up, and where are these underutilized parcels in the city that we can start to replicate a similar operation on.
Great, thank you. Aschley, I'm going to turn to you for a second, because I think to advance deconstruction, we have to have new technologies, right? So speak to that. Tell us a bit more about Urban Machine and how that approach is easier and more affordable for architects and builders to reuse lumber.
Sure, thank you. So Urban Machine was created in order to tackle a huge problem. There's about 37 million tons of dimensional lumber that ends up in our landfills each year, and that's because it's so labor intensive and expensive to remove nails and metal by hand. So it doesn't pencil out. Kathryn, you've talked a lot about, we're not gonna kind of change things just by focusing on it's the right thing to do, or it's the good thing to do for the environment. It has to pencil out economically as well. So we, again, like I mentioned, we're building these robots that mechanically remove the metal from the dimensional lumber in order to keep it dimensionally intact and then sent back into the supply chain. So we're really focusing on upcycling rather than downcycling, which would be crushing it, mulching it, burning it for fuel, depending on where you are in the country, and then worst case scenario, landfilling it, which is happening in huge volumes right now. So we are trying to, we kind of have I love the panel that Kathryn put together here, because all of this has to work together. So the policy kind of needs to drive the change. The technology needs to be there to make it feasible. And then once that product is kind of upcycled, there needs to be demand. And so there needs to be a place like Michael's that's allowing that to go back into the supply chain. So it's kind of it really is a full circle thing. One can't exist without the other. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is kind of change the industry, but we need help on both the supply, demand, and policy side to make that successful.
That's great. Michael, I'm going to turn to you for a second. I want you to tell this audience a little bit more about how we can get people to appreciate salvage and reuse of materials. And tell us about how the reuse people and building resources of San Francisco can do that. How can we encourage more people to buy from salvage?
A lot of our problem that we see is education and understanding of what goes on and what happens. And it's also a matter of culture. Like I said, we have 9 affiliate offices across the country, and they're spotty. We have 3 in Texas, we've got 1 in Seattle, we've got 1 in Utah, and we had 1 in Connecticut. And notice I never mentioned anything in the Midwest. People in the Midwest don't care. They've got so much land and so much stuff. Go take your 40 tons and throw it in the South 40 and we're done. So those sorts of things is we have an educational problem and awareness to bring up with those people. We offer through our scheme, as I mentioned, on the residential, and we do occasionally have people in the commercial area that are interested. We offer a donation. And so that's one of our selling points, is that, hey, give us the material, you get a donation. And everybody, and I presume everybody in this room, doesn't want to pay taxes. And that's not something that's, commonplace. Nobody's volunteering to pay taxes. So if we can offer a deduction on those for those building materials, that's a huge win-win. And it drives purpose and, for lack of a better word, morality. Hey, I want to help the environment, and not only that, I'm going to get partially paid for it. So those sorts of ideas to get out to everybody and to the general public on a more pervasive amount is going to help the industry and help us get going on it.
Great. I want to turn it back to landfills for a second. James, help us understand what the difference is between municipal waste, where our household waste goes, and construction waste. Are there 2 separate landfills? Are they treated different or not?
Yeah, so you can think of municipal solid waste as all of the waste generated in a city or a county in a given year, in a given period of time. And so that would include e-waste, the electronics coming out of homes and businesses. It's the curbside recycling, your blue and green and black bins in the back that are for homes and residences. It's also inclusive of the building activities that are happening in that jurisdiction. So the construction and demolition waste is a subset of total municipal solid waste. The best projections we're working with is that San Francisco will generate annually about 3 million tons of total solid waste for the municipality. It's estimated that 50% of that is due to building activities. Makes sense, these are the largest, heaviest materials. They do travel to the same landfills as the curbside elements do. The difference in San Francisco is that we have a franchise model for what gets collected curbside, so it's a vertically integrated system. The collection, the trucks that are hauling it, bring it to the recycling facilities, and the recycling facilities grab what they can to redirect it, and whatever they can't recycle or redirect for recycling, they send to the landfill they own. The construction sector is completely open and competitive, so we have hundreds of hauling companies. We have dozens of recycling facilities in play, and several landfills receiving the end results of those post-processed materials. So half of the total generation from building activities, about 25% of what's going in the landfill is the result of building activity. So some would say, well, it's a pretty strong signal. You went from half of the total generation to only 25% of the disposal. It's not that clear cut. Again, the results are kind of skewed in favor of the building industry in some ways, because A, it is the heaviest of materials. The whole solid waste management world is about tons. That's how its metric of success is tons in the hole or tons diverted away from the hole in the ground. So we have the largest, heaviest stuff. We also have really long-standing, the building industry, have long-standing local downcycling markets. And that's for the heaviest stuff, your concrete and your wood. None of them are recycled, they're all downcycled, but we have a significant footprint for the infrastructure that handles those two key materials. From there, the next two materials that are heavy and downcycled pretty well would be gypsum wallboard. And then the one that's really recycled is the metals. Once you break away from those four materials, it's a bit of a cliff dive that happens in terms of what can be diverted from landfill. We've gotten really good in recent years with carpet and carpet padding, but really after that, most of the materials being generated from the building sector do not have an alternative life. So again, those top four, clean metal, clean wood, clean gypsum drywall, concrete, and carpet. Those five materials, everything else, not very hopeful that it's going to find a second life.
So tell us a little bit more about the landfill issue that we have in the state. I mean, we have the most landfills in the country, I believe, the state of California. But you also mentioned that we might be running out of landfill space. So how urgent is this need to divert and reduce the amount of construction waste?
Has anyone ever been to a landfill?
Oh,
That's
wow.
awesome.
That's impressive.
Does anyone live near a landfill?
Not that we know of.
Okay, so that whole room tilted from almost all the hands up to none of the hands up. Does anyone want to live near a landfill? There's the crux of the problem. So we have lots of land. We could behave like the Midwest. We do have a very progressive legislative climate in California, no pun intended. And so it does get harder and harder to site landfills. And they will fill up, and you're going to have to find a new hole in the ground. And we have a very well-educated populace that doesn't want one in their backyard. Not in my backyard. The other problem with landfills is they all will ultimately fail one day. And so there's, I don't know the list, but it's extensive in terms of the hazardous materials that are coming in contact with one another in those cells that can corrode through the cell linings and eventually start to penetrate groundwater. So those are issues for those local communities. There's airborne impacts, that gypsum drywall. So every time we do a remodel and we want to knock that wall down and open up the room and get some of this beautiful light in, that gypsum drywall finds its way into the landfill. It gets wet. It's in an anaerobic environment, and it creates hydrogen sulfide. That is that rotten egg smell you get when you drive by a landfill. It's also very damaging to the respiratory system. So there's lots of problems related to landfills, which is why in the Bay Area we've had a really long-standing legislative push and private sector participation in recycling as much as possible. To your point though, a lot of the materials that can't be recycled still find their way to the landfill, and in fact some of the materials that we're claiming as recycled or downcycled are really just being landfilled but given a recycling credit because they're used in a beneficial way.
Aschley, one of the questions we get a lot about the wood that you clean is that it has to be regraded or may have limited use. So talk to us a little bit more about that, and what are the plans for making it reused for the original purpose?
Yeah, so currently the wood can be used or reused for architectural purposes, decking, walls, ceilings. It can be used for furniture, multiple purposes. It can also be reused structurally. Here in California and actually everywhere in the United States with the exception of Oregon and Washington, you do need to have that regraded before it can be structurally reused. So that's a possibility. We can do that today. But we are hopefully going to add to our existing technology an automated grader so that we're able to remove the metal and the fasteners and then also put a stamp on it to say that it can be reused structurally. That's ultimately where we want this to go. We need to be using it in larger volumes. The amount of material that we're trying to keep out of the landfill, it needs to have an end use. So there's only so many tables and chairs and things like that that you can make, right? We need to start using it in buildings, putting it back into kind of the highest value purpose that we can.
So do you have issues with getting architects or contractors to spec it? Like what's the supply chain getting to you if people don't know that that's even available?
Yeah, so we hear quite often from architects that it's not a super reliable thing to specify, not knowing, the supply is kind of up and down all the time because we don't have a current market like we do for virgin material. So right now, that if, you specify virgin 2x4s and 2x6s, those are going to be readily available. The price is going to go up and down a bit, but they're going to be there. What we're trying to do is really scale the volume. Work with folks like Michael and the reuse people, kind of retail outlets so that as an architect or a designer, you can kind of confidently specify reclaimed material just like you would virgin lumber. You can always substitute virgin material if you don't have the specific sizes that you're looking for. But that's one of the things that we hear. And then again, regrading. So reclaimed material generally or historically speaking has been more expensive than virgin material. We're trying to bring that cost down so that we're price competitive to eliminate the excuse that it's too expensive, so it gets value engineered out of the project. Same thing with the automated grading. We'd like to add that so that we're not bringing in a structural engineer, which again is adding time, cost, and increases the chance of being the reclaimed material.
Great. So one final question for Michael before we get to Q&A, so I have a chance to ask some questions of our panelists. Deconstruction seems to be foreign to most contractors, Michael. And I know you guys at the TRP train and instruct contractors on how to do it. Is it that daunting? I mean, what's keeping more contractors from trying to embrace at least partial deconstruction on a project?
The biggest constraint on deconstruction is the cost and the time. A general 2,000 square foot house will probably take us a week to 10 days to bring down. The clamshell can come in 2 to 3 hours and bring it down. The other thing is it's labor intensive. The cost of deconstruction is generally 30% or more higher than the cost of demolition, strict demolition. For our purposes and what we're looking for to be able to resell something, a contractor, a general contractor, and I don't want to be critical or derogatory towards them, but their job is to go in and get it out. They want those kitchen cabinets out of that kitchen yesterday. Boom, 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 they're gone. Well, in deconstruction, you've got to be careful how you remove them. You just can't put a crowbar behind that cabinet on the wall and tear it off, because now the next use can't necessarily have a mounting rail or anything on it, or you split the side of it, which makes it worthless anyway. So they've got to be a little bit careful and a little bit cognizant of how to take the house apart. And in deconstruction, we literally are taking the house apart piece by piece, just as it was put together. And that takes a lot of time. And so that's one of the reasons that our process is to offer a charitable donation on that, is that it mitigates the extra cost of the labor and the extra time that that contractor has to go into. And back again with what Kathryn asked was, we train contractors. We have a schedule of opportunities where we actually, either contractors at a physical site or in a classroom, train them how to take a house apart, or even a commercial building. We're getting into that arena too. And it's amazing, you know, some contractors come in with chainsaws. You've got 3 walls that meet the roof, and they come in and they cut the Y out of it. Well, all that lumber that they just cut that because they didn't want to take the nails out or undo it is now worthless. It's all below length and everything else. So there's quite a training process. We do certify contractors for deconstruction purposes. But again, the challenge is, how do you overcome the extra time, which usually the property owner is not interested in? They want it down and get it gone. And the extra cost, and whether or not the donation or other avenues, like James said, getting away from dump fees, offsets that additional cost of deconstruction. And the bottom line for me is that I promote, what's your morality? Where are you going here? Is it environment or is it dollars?
And I want to add one more thing. Based on our previous conversation when we were all together, it's interesting how all of the things that we're working on really come together. There's we at Urban Machine, we're working with folks all around the country to understand what's happening in each region with regard to you know, deconstruction policies, you know, incentives to deconstruct or to use reclaimed material, and everything kind of has to work together. And we're in a chicken and an egg situation. There is a specific municipality that we're working with. They have a great deconstruction policy in place for their residential buildings. So they are, you know, they're basically enacted this policy. The contractors have to follow it. They have to carefully deconstruct the buildings, which is fantastic. But they don't currently have the infrastructure or the technology to really manage all the materials that are being deconstructed. So wood in particular is being carefully deconstructed, which takes time, money, and then it's going to their local facility and it's getting crushed anyway. So it's a great start that the policy exists, but then it needs to have all the other things in place in order to support it. Otherwise, it's just not going to be successful. So they all work together.
It sort of begs the question, maybe this is more for James, but do we need more federal or state incentives to encourage property owners to deconstruct? We have other industries that have been subsidized for to move greener practices forward. So where can regulation help?
Or incentives?
I guess to stay with the product that we've been touching on, wood, salvage wood. The working group I mentioned earlier, the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group, we were in conversation for a number of years, and what was happening here in the state was a state policy was being brought online that requires organics of any type to be diverted out of the landfill systems. Organics would be the food waste, the yard trimmings. The reason behind that is when organic material ends up in a landfill and landfill gets capped every day, those materials are breaking down and decomposing in an anaerobic system. Anaerobic digestion, the byproduct is methane. It's 35 times more powerful than CO2 and its global warming potential. And so the state, kind of seeing what San Francisco did with their green bin system, said this has to happen statewide. And so the bill is SB 1383, called short-lived climate pollutants through methane. And so now the state is figuring out, hey, we've now required every jurisdiction to divert organics away from landfill, but we don't have the infrastructure to actually make that happen. What is the infrastructure? A composting facility. So instead of the truck going to landfill, it goes to it. They need to build something like 100 compost facilities statewide. They're in the process of figuring out how to do that. They are doing that. They're also doing the whole chicken and egg thing we talked about earlier, which is, well, we're probably going to end up with heaping mountains of compost everywhere. This would have been in the landfill otherwise. So there's a requirement to create the demand, and they say to each jurisdiction, you're now required to procure that compost, that final product. So you've got the pull on the whole system. The same playbook was run with paper. You want to sell paper bags in San Francisco, they've got to be 75% post-consumer recycled paper content. So there's the demand, pulling on the supply you're generating by saying trucks can't go to landfill. So that's one example of how and what we did with the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group was the state didn't recognize dimensional lumber as an organic product. And we said, hey, you're kind of overlooking this whole thing. You've got food, you've got yard trimmings. What about all of the dimensional lumber that's finding its way into landfill? And so our lobbying effort to the state had them recognize it. That was really important because now it's part of the requirement of what should be diverted. It also allows for the state's grant funding of this infrastructure to consider operations that would otherwise be, that will be capturing and diverting salvaged, deconstructed, dimensional lumber. Prior to that recognition that that was an organic product, they wouldn't qualify for any of those grant awards. Big picture though is there has been billions and billions of dollars from state governments, federal governments that supported and propped up both landfilling and recycling infrastructure. There has been very little to none of that that's happened for the reuse infrastructure. So when we talk about the circular economy, the new head of the state's solid waste authority, Cal Recycle, her name is Zoe Heller, she kind of came out of the circularity division, was a deputy director, and she's very fond of saying recycling is not circularity. So to get to circularity from a waste management perspective, you have to come up the zero waste hierarchy. You've got to get out of disposal into recycling and out of recycling into reuse. Eventually you need to get out of reuse, which is just waste prevention in general. There wasn't even a product that had to be put on a truck that had to get routed somewhere for reuse. So I think that's a look to the future of where you'll see the next suite of policies, the next suite of grants, incentives, subsidies, all of this lending towards the practice shifts, all of it kind of coming together.
I think we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If anybody has one for these, first of all, let's thank these speakers. I know those brains are thinking, okay, we've got a couple right here.
Hi, thanks for your time. I'm Kathy Rye. I'm a structural engineer, lead AP, also a general contractor licensed. Is it helpful, this is the question for Aschley, to specify dimensions that are shorter than the standard? Because we could do that. I'm also a member of SEONC, the Structural Engineers Association of Northern California.
That certainly wouldn't hurt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then by how much? That's probably a conversation we could have later.
So we collect material from the local MRFs as well as deconstruction contractors. From the MRFs, we just ask when they're pulling the dimensional lumber for us that it's at least 6 feet in length. So we're getting usually around 7+ feet, but then we trim off the ends. So we're generally, 6 foot. We end up with 6 foot. Some of it, that's a little bit shorter. We're also looking into finger jointing partnerships as well, so that we can take that shorter material in the 4 foot, 5 foot ranges, and then finger joint so that you have longer dimensions. But yeah, there's always going to be enough short material. It starts to get less plentiful as they get longer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hello. Hi, my name is Whitney Shrouth. My company is SA&C, Sustainable Architecture and Construction. So I have a suite of products and services, but I've always been focused for the last 23 years on sort of sustainable architecture, construction, and deconstruction, and reusing those materials back into my projects. And I'm now at a position where I have a line of merchandise that's made from zero waste projects where I'm playing the game of using up those little pieces that either can't get resold or can't go back in as wainscoting or flooring or whatever. So my question to you is, what would you suggest to be the best path forward for someone like me where I have a company, it's small but growing, we have this line of merchandise that's specifically made from, deconstructed and discarded and salvaged wood, specifically the little pieces that cannot be reused structurally. And I see a lot of money out there and municipalities that are interested in, initiatives and grants, but how to best form partnerships with either these municipalities or other organizations in this world of deconstruction and sustainable architecture, so that I can sort of grow, and not so much to make money for my company, but to support this movement and create more jobs and sort of show a way forward in this circular economy that we're trying to talk about, that I think is the real problem, because we're quickly going to have so much material, namely wood, but then what to do with it, especially the little pieces.
Who wants to take that one?
I can take a first crack at it. I think it's important to fold into the discussions that are happening as we connect stakeholders from each of the nodes in this ecosystem. So I mentioned one, September 25th is the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group. There's other groups out there. There's the All for Reuse Owners Alliance. That's the largest real estate portfolio owners in the Bay Area. And they're all pledging to drive reuse through their building portfolios, their real estate portfolios. There's the Bay Area Sustainable Construction Leaders. Through the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group, you'd be getting into contact with the jurisdictions, so the policy writers and implementers, the for-profit, non-profit, retailers and resellers. There's some of them in the room today. Michael's representing the non-profit side of things. There's for-profit in the room. So the material resellers are there. And then the practitioners that I mentioned. So your architects, your designers, your contractors, and everyone in between. So that's my best attempt at a non-answer. Answer is to just start to fold into those conversations, because I think what's happening right now is we're building the bike as we ride it. And there's plenty of opportunity for voices like yours to step into those rooms and those spaces and advocate for practice shifts or make your services available to a group of stakeholders who otherwise may not have even known that's what you were doing.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that. We're focusing on finding reuse opportunities for some of the shorter material, maybe the less desirable material when it works on its own, but when it goes into like an engineered product, then it has greater end use possibilities. So one of the things that we're working on right now with our partner at All Bay Mill and Lumber Company, they just purchased a dowel laminated timber machine. So we're making dowel laminated timber panels, and that can be made from shorter pieces of wood, shorter, smaller cross sections. But when you put it together, it creates an amazing possibility. So instead of using glue or nails, you're using dowels, which is the ultimate, environmentally friendly way to put a product together. So that works great for office partition walls and things like that. It can be used in place of, your traditional drywall and framing that you typically see. So we're looking at options like that. That's just one example, but other.
Hi. Thanks for your time. Dave Charn. I just have a quick question on upstream at the material selection process. Is there sort of a major impact or any incentives, any government impact on sort of choosing materials that would make it more likely for deconstruction or downstream reuse?
So the policy framework we're proposing, and again, it's meant to be part of a basket of tactics. The best thing to do would be to leave the structure alone, so don't demolish it. That would be called adaptive reuse. And there's code shifts happening right now. The state green building code did adopt an embodied carbon. So embodied carbon, it's the catchphrase that captures the emissions associated with the linear material flow of our supply chain, take, make, waste. And a lot of the products that are in the building industry rely on a 5 or 6 continent supply chain. And so there's emissions associated that went up into the atmosphere to warm the climate with each touch point, from raw resource extraction to manufacturing to assembly, et cetera, to then just destruction, end of life. So the idea would be to recognize that these are banks of carbon. These walls have banked the carbon that's already up in the atmosphere. Don't tear them down, because then you start that whole process over again. That's not what we're talking about with the deconstruction policy framework I've been mentioning. So they will work hand in hand, which is maybe your architect or your project team or your owner comes in and says, I'll keep 45% of this structure intact. The rest of it, I want a soft demo and build anew. So the deconstruction policy is to now go look through, and we would work very closely with the end market. They're informing what that assessment looks like, and they can say, hey, look, we can take these timbers, we can take these windows, we can take the fixtures out of the bathroom. All of that is salvageable. We know there's a way to reintroduce that and get a second life for it. So that's first step, is just do the salvage assessment to see what can be saved from that downcycling process. And the reason we have to work with those end markets is these materials need a place to live temporarily. It's very rare that you're going to find a clean connection between project A and project B. So the project that's doing the demolition and the project is ultimately going to rehome those products that were deconstructed. There's usually a significant gap in time, sometimes in space as well. They're far off, maybe in another state. Even if that product had to lie down in Michael's yard for 9 months and then found its way on a truck that went up to Oregon to reinstall it, the carbon emissions associated with that are vastly less than if we relied on the virgin ecosystem of 5-6 continent supply chain. So that's the sort of policy lever I think we're going for. It's what Palo Alto does. They'll be on the panel with myself and a few others on the 25th. Palo Alto is recognizing that, hey, we've generated the supply, but now we're kind of waiting for voluntary demand to come online, and it just hasn't happened. So you see this also in LEED version 5. That's an industry influencer. They're influencing it by incentivizing the LEED credits. LEED version 5 is coming out, and they have the same framework for their deconstruction and reuse credits. They're saying, do the survey, divert based off of what you've measured and surveyed, and then there's credits for reintroduction. And they're picking the 3 markets they think have the best shot of being developed for reuse circular economy ecosystem. They're going with, these are commercial projects they're looking at. So you've got furniture, carpet tiles, and ceiling tiles are the markets they're picking. We haven't gotten that far in our policy framework. We know in the residential sector, wood it's a driver. It's the one that's most easily recovered. We have new technologies coming along that make it more easily refined for reintegration, replaned, regraded. In the commercial sector, we're kind of in agreement with LEED that furniture is going to be one of the more easily recovered for reuse items. Where we go from there, though, we don't know. Is it carpet tiles? Is it ceiling tiles? We've seen an amazing operation in Pittsburgh. It's called Doors Unhinged. They became less of, I kind of describe Michael's operation as a generalist. We'll take whatever makes sense. Maybe it's lumber today, maybe it's doors, maybe it's windows, maybe it's fixtures. It's a generalist approach to things. We have a number of those in the Bay Area, urban ore, placemakers, building resources, green links. The operation in Pittsburgh is a specialist. He's only working in commercial door systems. And what he's able to do is he can do the deconstruction service, take them out, store them at a subsidized warehouse. That's really key here, is to make sure the overhead comes down so these operations can come online. He'll store them there, he'll refurbish, repair the hardware systems, and then he'll reinstall them at the next project when ready. And that's allowing him to warranty the product, because he's been the chain of custody from disassemble to reintroduction. And that's a barrier with commercial reuse, is folks want the warranty. So I don't know if it really did a good job of answering that question, but I was trying to tie together how the policy kind of can drive the desired outcomes by helping shift practices, but the policy is not enough. We're realizing we need to bridge the gap on the infrastructure side of things, and the municipality does have to play a role in helping warehouse these products, almost looking at them as a utility. We offer up resources to manage wastewater, we offer up resources to manage solid waste. We're going to have to offer up resources to help manage this utility, this resource of salvage building products. And we have a blueprint in what we're doing with Michael's operation down in the southeast corner of the city, and we're in talks with the state freeway authority, Caltrans, the largest real estate owner in the state, to start to take some of their parcels at a below market rate and allowing us to install the next generation of building material redistribution centers, bringing it to scale, bringing it into the commercial sector.
Thank you. Ingrid Ballman, I'm an architectural designer, and been doing some work in the sustainable electrification and other areas with Alameda especially. My question has to do with inventory. There is a vast amount of unused recycled products, recycled furniture that is available readily everywhere right now. And one of the issues that we're facing as designers and architects is to actually have an access to a, how would I say, a coordinated, whether it's an app, whether it's a internet, whatever platform would allow this, so that all the resources are accessible in a comprehensive format. Maybe this is more industry specific. It might be a little hard to really make it available for all products. But if there was a way to work with AI and other ways to really bridge the gaps about what we don't know and what we know as to how we find these resources, that would make us take leaps in terms of being able to bring those materials and use them on site.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we're, what did you say, building the bike while we're riding it? Yeah, so that's definitely, that is a good example. There are, folks out there like Reaply. Are you familiar with Reaply? Right, so there's companies like that are popping up. I think it's still disjointed though and fragmented. So to your point, you're probably, thinking it would be great to have almost like an eBay or something that is a little bit more either national, international, even global, where you can go. I think that we're moving in that direction. We're just not quite there yet. I think that definitely is going to be part of the solution, so that it's accessible for designers and for contractors to keep that material moving, so that you're not sitting on a bunch of inventory, or when you need it, you know where to find it and you know how to get it. We're speaking with a deconstruction contractor in Seattle. And they were talking about, so they do have deconstruction ordinances there. They also have policy now, though, that you have to use a certain percentage of reclaimed material. And so the deconstruction contractor was basically saying, now we're running into an issue where we're running out of material, which is great. That's what we want to see. That's the first kind of area that we've heard that they need more reclaimed material, that they're not sitting on it looking for end use. So going back to policy, it's like driving policy through taking the building down in the right way, but then kind of forcing folks to reuse a certain percentage so that keeps moving in a circle. And I think when we see more of that, we're going to also see the invent of kind of AI, like you said, online marketplaces that can kind of bridge that gap. But I think we're not there yet. Yeah.
And we've done quite a bit of office furniture of that type. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's not much of a market for it. I know there's a warehouse in San Jose that's got 2 million square feet of cubicles and chairs, and that's not moving. Mm-hmm. So some of the jobs we've gotten from some of the very famous and very large tech companies that we've done here locally, we've engaged the international market. We've had shipments in containers going to Ghana. We've had a lot going to Mexico. And one of the problems with those is, first of all, is who's going to pay for the freight, because it does get rather expensive even though we're giving them the product. But secondarily, We recently had a situation where we had probably up to as many as 10 containers ready to go going to Tonga, and they backed out. And so now we've got a place in Oakland that's full of 40,000 square feet of office furniture, and it makes it difficult.
And everybody's working from home, so.
Can I riff off that? Because our department played a big role in the Reapley marketplace. So Reapley's a clean tech company out of the Midwest. They made their mark by, it was born out of Northwestern. The CEO, the founder, Gary Cooper, was working in laboratories there, research, realized they're flush with all of this equipment and supplies. Right across town, though, are clinics and schools that are just desperate for these things. He built an online platform to connect suppliers and receivers. And it worked really well. And then the city of Chicago said, it happened right around the pandemic, they said, hey, can we use that app to create a PPE exchange? Because the construction sector's been put on ice. They have all the N95s. All our frontline workers need them. Let's use your platform to do that. And let's actually use the algorithm, the technology, to bring in some equity considerations. We want first the products to find their way to those front lines, communities, the BIPOC-owned businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And so that worked really well. And then we met with Reapley under a grant award from the Carbon Neutral City Alliance. And we said, we want to build a marketplace online just for building products, business to business type of thing. We want to kind of do the same thing, make sure there's priority receivers coming in. These could be clinics, nonprofits, schools, again, Black, Indigenous, people of color, owned businesses, local businesses. We would kind of vet who gets to come in as that priority receiver. Reapley's gatekeeping on who gets to come in and put material on. So this marketplace was built. It's live. It exists. You can look it up. It's I think Reapley rebranded it the Bay Area Reuse Marketplace. Reapley is R-H-E-A-P-L-Y. Very new. It's in its infancy. There's a lot of things that have to come online to get this thing from surviving to thriving. Codes are one of them. So creating a new marketplace to receive material from a project that was told they must deconstruct. You can put that on the online exchange. Again, the online marketplace was meant to help close that gap in time and space between supply projects and receiving projects. It's not always perfect. There's still a need to have some temporary lie-down space more often than not. So hopefully one day we'll see the Reapley marketplace interfacing with folks like the reuse people who are taking some of that product and supply, putting it in their physical yard or warehouses, but also listing it on the exchange, because that's what you want, is a dependable, reliable place to go and shop so you can spec for that later on and say, oh my, there's always commercial door systems on the Reapley exchange. I can start to spec for that and say, before you go and procure, you've got to go, I want to see at least 20% of my commercial door systems in this project coming from the secondary market. Again, that's the lead framework for credits. 20% of your furniture or your carpet tiles will come from the secondary markets. So what we've seen success-wise from the Reapley product is recent. So LinkedIn and Disney put a bunch of product on there, and a developer in LA, and what they saw was, we're building multifamily housing for formerly homeless. There's all this furniture coming out of these tech companies that were really built to feel like the collegiate experience. If you go into these offices, there's couches. It was just meant to prolong the collegiate experience. You've got kombucha on tap. You've got the ramen bar over there.
You got the
And
gongs.
they all walked away. They left it. They've all left the stuff there as they've gone to work from home. So we've got 40% office vacancy in the commercial real estate sector right now. Many of those offices, my own, is moving back into a space that was housed a former tech company who walked away after putting millions of dollars into a redesign. Pandemic hit, they said, hey, the toys work, the tools work, Zoom is great, we're never coming back. What they did was when they walked away, they sold all that product to the building owner for $1. That gives them the right to now deduct that in taxes, right? Their assets have depreciated. They can claim that depreciation. Hey, $10 million in everything, the big screen TVs, the conference tables, the kitchen. $10 million in, we sold it for $1, we get the loss. What the property owner is doing is ingenious. They're recruiting in the next tenant by saying, look at this office, you don't have to spend $1 on the build out. It is all yours for $1. You've got first right of refusal on any of the product. So now what we did is we went and walked through and said, we'll take that, that, and that, and that, and that. Give that to our architect and our design team. They built the design around all the product we already have. So it was a win for everybody. They got a write-off on the product they abandoned. The owner of the building got to lure in the next tenant and entice them with these amenities of, we've got all this product waiting for you. It's just plug and play, come on in. And then we come in and we have a lower budget for materials and supplies. We have a lower impact on the environment because we didn't procure anything new. That, what we're trying to say now is that model is going to work, and what you don't take into your next design, you should migrate onto the Reaply platform, because that then becomes available as we start to promote that marketplace throughout the state. That becomes available to folks down south or in Oregon or in Washington as we connect these Reaply marketplaces, because they're in now New York, Chicago, DC, Seattle, I believe, and on their way to Vancouver. So these markets will talk to one another. What we saw is the LinkedIn products, the couches and things of that nature, were rehomed by a housing developer in Los Angeles. And all they had to do was work out the logistics of who was going to haul it. So this is sort of what we've been working on, is we know the policy is going to come. We know someone will sponsor it and introduce it in San Francisco. I mean, it's the most progressive legislative body around, and that doesn't mean it's always good policy. We're concerned with, does the policy make sense and does it have a chance to be successfully implemented? So I'm very concerned about the implementation plan, and that's why we put years into connecting these stakeholder groups. We launched something called the All for Reuse Owners Alliance. We plug in with the Bay Area Sustainable Construction Leaders. We're a steering committee member of the Bay Area Deconstruction Working Group. We took some grant award money and we worked with Reaply to build an online marketplace. We put out an RFP to get a nonprofit operator and a brick and mortar site here in San Francisco. Building the infrastructure and the network connectivity, and also then starting to build case studies and toolkits to help the practice shift happen more rapidly, either in advance or for sure once the mandates come online. So I'd love to, if you have any interest in that Reaply marketplace, we can talk offline.
RHEAPLY. That is all we have time for this panel. Again, let's give them a big warm thank you for